Oh, I see Tom Rossi in the
Oh,
building and Francis. Francis, we were just talking about we need to come up with either prizes or some sort of designation for our top contributors because you're a top contributor. And we need something for Tom too, like being our number one, fan out there too.
all right. You ready to kick it off?
Yes. We're going straight in. Okay.
Yeah, we are already 30 seconds live, so we're ready for you.
All right. Sounds good. I was going to see if Alex was going to join us at the top, but we'll just get him on board
Yep.
when he joins us. All right. Fantastic. Well, just want to go and say welcome to the JPU Hurricane Party edition of the live stream today. Today, we'll be recapping some of our biggest takeaways from the largest podcast conference in the world, Podcast Movement. I'm your host and one of the co-founders, Badr Milligan. I also host the Short Box podcast. It's a comic book talk show. And joining me is my fellow co-founder, the real beauty and brains of the whole operation, Blythe Brumleve, host of Everything is Logistics podcast and founder of the Digital Dispatch Company. Blythe, how you doing? Hello.
I'm doing good. I'm slow to recover. The hurricane day is making me a little sleepy, but happy that everyone has joined us and happy to, really start the recap process. And I think the processing of all the information that we learned over at Podcast Movement last week.
Yes, i.e., holy crap, now I've actually got to do all the takeaways I said I was going to do. I feel like after a conference, you kind of allot yourself like a day or two of just being like decompressing. I'm tired of talking with people. I'm tired of the word podcasting. But now, that time has left. Now we're in like, okay, what did we learn and what are some actionable items? So I wanted to start off by saying, for anyone that might bring in after the fact that has no idea what podcast movement is, it is the self-described world's largest podcast conference. And I could probably believe that as a more than just hyperbole. I just want to list some of the media partners that this conference has listed. They've got partners and sponsors like Pod News, iHeart Podcasts, Libsyn, Podbean, Amazon Music. Paramount was at this particular conference in Denver. Focusrite, Mackie, Wondery, and the list goes on. So if there is any company business out there that dabbles in podcasting, they are at least somewhat involved with Podcast Movement. I know Podcast Movement does 2 events per year. One is their Podcast Evolutions event, which I've never been. I'm not quite sure what the target demo is on that one, but Podcast Movement being the larger one that kind of brings out a lot of different sponsors and companies and folks to join that one. But it was both our first time attending Podcast Movement. And I was curious to hear from you. What was your initial impressions about the conference? Like expectations going in versus the reality of what you got to experience?
Well, I think it was very clear and evident from a lot of the marketing from Podcast Movement that this is a serious conference. I think that, I in my work, I go to a lot of conferences and some of them are a little bit smaller, some of them are, a little bit grander and, they're at really incredible locations. This was one of those that's a little bit grander. It's at a really good location. And you can tell some of those heavy hitters, not just you can tell, they were all there, the heavy hitters of podcasting were there at the companies that you had mentioned. And then my only concern, and I think we'll get into this a little bit later on, is how beneficial something like this is for the independent podcasters. So should you shell out money to go to an event like this? And we'll kind of get into that, a little bit later on if that makes sense for you or not. But if you are a company in this space, I think it makes a ton of sense. And we saw a lot of those companies on display there. And even if they weren't on display there, they were at least, networking among the crowd and networking among the people, which was really, really cool to see. I think there was about 1,500 people there, huge expo floor, lots of talks. They also had what I thought was really cool, and it kind of sounds like they maybe need to work on, based on Podcast Movement's email that they sent out this morning, that they need to work on a little bit of the sound issues. But I
Mm.
thought it was a creative approach because they have a giant expo floor where all of the vendors and tables are set up for everybody selling their goods and services for this for the industry. But then they also had stages of the talk. So typically at a conference, you will have breakaway rooms, and you'll have to go to another area in order to catch talks and hear different conversations. But a lot of the conversations were taking place on the expo floor, so it was a really unique opportunity to be able to just be on the floor talking to people, and then walking by and seeing a topic that may be of interest to you, and stopping by and listening. That typically doesn't happen at regular conferences, where you have to really be strategic on which classes or which sessions you're going to go to, and then fit in the expo floor. I thought that it was interesting to be able to tag team both of those, kind of at the same time. So that's one part that I really liked about the event.
I think you described it really well while we were there. I think you made a comment. You were like, "This feels like all the cool kids of podcasting are here," and I definitely got that. There's definitely a certain upper echelon of like the podcasting industry and world that's representative there. And I want to say, like, in my personal opinion, that it met the expectations I had going in. I had a feeling that this was going to be like, corporate, very well funded. We're talking networks were present. So that level of podcasting was really cool to see because we went to Podfest, and I feel like that is proudly grassroots, caters to your everyday podcaster from the starting out to the mid range and maybe even above that. This was like corporate. We're talking corporate
Mhm.
podcasting companies that dabble in podcasting, whether that be creating content, having a network, or offering software and different solutions for podcasters. So for me, it definitely met my expectations and maybe even above that. And to your point, that the conference floor was it felt small and big at the same time. I think that was maybe the one expectation I had, was that it was going to be massive, but it felt very like you could handle it pretty well. Is a phrase that's coming to mind. Like it felt like as someone going there for the first time, I didn't feel too lost. And to your point, it was a lot of interactiveness, a lot of talking, a lot of presentations and speeches going on at the same time. So that kind of made it a little fun. It definitely kept us busy. I'd say like we always had something going on. Oh, we got Alex on the. Oh, there we go. Alex has joined us.
What's up, guys?
Here we go. Yeah, Alex, welcome, welcome. All right. Alex, I'm gonna toss this to you, man, because you are I'd say kind of a veteran when it comes to these podcast
Yeah,
conferences and excursions and things like this. This was not your first time going to a podcast movement, right?
correct. No, this was so I've been to Evolutions twice, and this was my second podcast movement. So like they
Okay.
have the two conferences, they do them each, like kind of divide them up among 6 months. So yeah, and now I've done both of them twice.
Okay, fantastic. And right before I ask you what your overall impressions were, I want to say for anyone uh, here on the live stream or that'll be tuning in later, we've got Alex Sanfilippo, who is kind of, I don't know, man. Alex, we would go around to a lot of these vendors and we would mention Jacksonville. And I think your name was, if 99% of the time, it'd be, Alex? Oh, Podmatch.
Sweet.
So we were like,
That's
yes,
funny.
yes, we do. Actually, we do
I
know
like
Alex.
that. That's cool. Thanks for sharing that,
So
man. I didn't know that. That's cool.
So for anyone that doesn't know Alex is the host of Podcasting Made Simple. He's the founder of Pod Pros, a software company focused on serving podcasters through their various software and offerings like Podmatch, Podcast SOP, Pod Lottery, and you just launched PodScore, right?
Correct. Yep.
I think Tom just said it best. Alex is the Jacksonville ambassador of podcasting. I like it. All right, Alex, what was
What's up, bro?
what was your impression of the conference?
So kind of reinforcing what Blythe just said, really, it's just like it felt heavily industry, which is fine. So by the way, the Podcast Movement has two different events. So Podcast Movement Evolutions is supposed to be strictly industry. So I went there and I met like 4 or 5 podcasters, even though there was like 800 people there probably. It was all people in the industry. Podcast Movement's an extension of that. And I think y'all put it really well. It's very professional. So I'd say out of people I met, it was 1 out of 4 were actual podcasters, and the rest were some sort of service, software, company, network, any of the type of things, right? And so that was like kind of my first thoughts between the two conferences. They both lay more onto the industry side, if you will. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but if you're checking this out and you're like, hey, I'm new to podcasting, I'm an indie podcaster. I don't mean to like take sides or throw shade either way or another, but PodFest would be better for you if you're brand new, because you'll find more people that are in the same sphere as you. And if you go to Podcast Movement, you might talk to a podcaster who's like, yeah, I've done 1,000 episodes and I've had 30 million downloads. Like, what about you? And you're like, 1 episode, 2 downloads, my mom and my cousin, right? So just keeping that in mind. However, it does have its place. Like, it's a great industry, had an absolute blast, learned a lot as well.
Well said. Yeah, well said. And I think for me in Blythe's case, we were going there to, promote the Jax Podcasters United, see what opportunities were there for us. So I think it was a good fit for us. But I'm right there with you, Alex. I think something like a PodFest, which is a little more catered to your everyday podcaster, would be probably a little more beneficial. But let's go and shift gears, and I want to hear about any light bulb moments either two of you had at the event. Were you sitting in on a presentation, or did you meet someone that kind of gave you a piece of advice, or you heard something that was like, wow, I never really thought about that? Blythe, you want to go first?
I think it was one of the keynotes, Angela Yee, who is infamous for being on the Breakfast Club for forever. I think it was like 12 years that she was on the platform. And she said that she doesn't want to have gotcha moments with her guests. And she said that with, essentially especially coming from the sports world, that's where I kind of felt like when I was creating my sports related show, is that in order to scale, in order to get bigger, I was going to have those viral gotcha moments. I was going to have to be one of those people that just extreme one side or the other. And I didn't want to be that kind of creator. And it was a big reason of why I wanted to shift to go into something else, to go into, another area of coverage. So that's a big reason. Also, I was working in logistics at the time, supply and demand. There's not a lot of podcasters in logistics. So I thought, well, maybe I can be more of my true self in logistics. And hearing somebody like Angela Yee, who's at the top of her game, has several different ventures that she's working on. She's somebody from a broadcasting perspective that I really look up to. Her saying that was just a further affirmation that okay, I'm doing things the right way. I'm doing things in a way that I'm comfortable, that I don't want to make my guests feel like they're going to come into a moment where I'm going to try to get them to say something they don't mean. I want my podcast to be a safe space for conversations. And I don't want to treat it as sort of like a dissertation. I want to treat it as a conversation. So that was one of my big takeaways. I think another light bulb moment for me was one of the panels that they said, sending your shows to the press with pull quotes. So interesting quotes that you have from your episodes, and being able to take like a preview of that episode and send it to your local news or somebody, maybe an industry trade publication. These reporters are constantly looking for stories. And so if you're creating those story moments on your show, being able to give reporters like a sneak preview of an episode that's coming out soon, either through pull quotes, having them listen to the episode before it gets officially released, that could be additional exposure for you and your show. So that was one thing that really stood out to me, and I think is actionable no matter if you have a top 10 show or a top 10,000 show. That was one that I think a lot of our group, especially members of the JPU, can really take advantage of and gain access to that additional discoverability and additional credibility that comes from some of these legacy news platforms that are shining a light on your show.
Those are some fantastic tactics right there. Yeah, I had those listed down too as like, wow, that's a really interesting marketing and way to grow and get your show in front of a different audience. Alex, what about you? Did anything leave an impression on you?
Yeah, I'll share a couple things. First off, my favorite part about the event, like at the event itself, was what they hired a company. It's called Brain Date. I always do air quotes when I say that, guys. I can't help but because it just sounds weird to say. But the Brain Dates, which basically were, you could schedule time as like a facilitator or someone who wanted to attend, and they had tables that I think sat 8 to 10 people, and they just had a section where it was all these round tables and all these different topics you could sign up to attend or lead one. That's where I found most of the newer indie podcasters like ourselves, right? I found those people there, and so I led a few of them, and I also attended some as well. And that's where I got the majority of the value from the entire event, was actually at that specifically. And all the things I learned were very small, but like because they were focused, I went with a specific question, wanting an answer, if that makes sense. So on the flight home, because it's, I don't know how long it is, but a few hours, right? Felt like a lifetime. When after these events, the flight home always seems like it takes forever. Anyway, right? Anyway, I was able to implement everything. So it was all like really small takeaways, but things I had just been questioning and wasn't sure. Because you know what it is? Sometimes we have questions that we don't know how to ask a search engine, right? Chances are someone has done a video on it or written about it, but you don't even know how to ask the question. That's what I was running into. So I sat at these tables and was able to finally be like, hey, let me word vomit, for lack of a better term. And then you tell me what I'm trying to say and then give me the answer I'm looking for. And I got all the answers I was looking for. That type of thing right there is extremely valuable. All really small things, nothing even really worth mentioning, but the brain date side of things, was where I saw the most value for me personally. Beyond that, from like a 20,000 foot level as a service provider in the industry, I wanted to also get a pulse on the companies that are involved and the people in the industry side. I confirmed two things that I've known, but maybe didn't want to believe, that just aren't my favorite. But the majority of the industry is after the top 1,000 podcasters. So if you're 1,001 beyond, they're like, okay, go away. Call me when you have more downloads, right? Like that's where a lot of people go. So a lot of the companies there, like, how many downloads do you get? Are you in the top 1,000 of all shows? Because if not, quit wasting my time. So that's number one. That was like, I hate seeing that. And that's not all companies. Thankfully, we're in Jacksonville, Florida, with companies like Buzzsprout who do focus on the indie podcaster. By the way, I'm a paying customer. So, and then the other thing I realized is there's not really any new innovations in the industry. There are people doing like small tweaks, but there's nothing groundbreaking that's happened, I'd say, since the rise of AI, if you will. Now everyone is just riding that train of like, ooh, we do AI now too. I'm like, cool, that's not new anymore, right? Like we all do AI. It's funny, Podmatch, we have an AI algorithm that does the matching, and we announced that in 2020 and nobody cared. Like so much that we just took it out of the branding. And now I'm like, should we mention we have AI again? And just my co-founder, technical guy, he's like, dude, who cares? He's like, everyone does AI now. He goes, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I digress on that. But again, just seeing there's not a lot of innovation happening. I do see a lot of competition coming up across the board. So it's forcing everybody to actually, instead of innovate, hone in what they're able to not do super well yet and actually get really good at it. So overall, I am seeing the industry really perfect the craft of what they do, which makes me think in probably about 2 years from now, we'll start seeing more innovations happening again. Just my thoughts. There are people who are there who would like literally take me outside and stone me for saying that, who believe that like every day something's changing and growing. But I haven't seen anything in a long time that's made me go, wow, that's impressive. Let's put it that way. It's probably been almost a year since I've said that, and there was nothing there that made me say that. That again, not to be negative, because it's good that there's competition. Everyone's getting forced to fill in the cracks they have and to improve across the board. But don't go to these type of events thinking like I'm going to find the next big thing that's going to like just shatter the entire universe, right? So those are my thoughts. Again, getting in the smaller circles is really where the value is at a big event like this. And that goes for PodFest, that goes for Podcast Move, it goes for any of them. When you can get into a small group of people having the same thing they want to accomplish, you can go really far that way.
That is some really good insight, Alex. And it reminds me of what Pablo Gonzalez, who wasn't able to join today, we were going to have on, but me and Blythe spent a lot of time with him at Podcast Movement. For anyone that doesn't know, Pablo is part of the JPU. He's a founder of Be the Stage. He's a host of a B2B community builder show. And, I had asked him on the first day, we were grabbing like breakfast, and I was like, hey, Pablo, what is your goal? Because, Pablo is all about community, building community, networking with like, face-to-face. And he had an interesting, response. He was like, well, I'm not, he had nothing lined up in terms of presentations or, stopping by booths or the expo floor. He had told me, hey, I'm hanging out in this room here where, podcasters can just hang out and from the expo floor. And I'm going to sit at a table I can and meet as many people as I can. And I thought that was an interesting strategy to like, navigating the expo floor and meeting folks. It's like, why not go hang out where everyone's just kind of like trying to take a break and just chill. So hearing you say that having those one-on-one interactions, the brain dates were really helpful. I think, it got me thinking of Pablo. I'd say I had two kind of major light bulb moments. And one of them wasn't like brand new, but I think, Alex, to your point, sometimes you've got questions that you don't know how to answer. Other times, like, the answer, but you just need it reinforced. You need to like hear it from someone else or in a different way. And you're like, yeah, that's a good point. And one of the main ones was, I think we were at a growing podcast audience, what actually works and what doesn't. There was the name of the presentation there. And I forgot who said this, but they advised like, hey, consistency obviously being very important to growing your show, but also studying what other shows are in your space. Like, what are people listening to, in your category? What makes those shows good? Like, what are the top podcasts in your categories? And like seeing what you could lift and make your own. And, that's not brand new, but the way they ended it by saying people listen to other podcasts. Like, people have multiple podcasts they listen to, and it doesn't, it could be multiple, whatever. I run a comic book podcast. Someone could be listening to several comic book podcasts, and it doesn't mean that I have to view them as competition. If anything, we should be friends. We should be sharing like information and, seeing what type of, things we could do together. And I thought that was a cool way of putting it, is that like, there doesn't need to be competition in this podcast space, because, there's options for people. Like the listening habits for someone will change depending on who you ask. So I thought that was really cool to hear that. And one other one that just like kind of blew me away, because I had never heard of this, but paid feed drops. I had not heard this phrase before, or this marketing a tactic, but it's essentially either paying or organizing or coming to a negotiation with another podcast to drop your little episode in their feed. And that kind of ties back to like, what other podcasts are in your space that, are performing at your same level, or, you're trying to get in front of. So in my case, like, I could find another comic book podcast and offer to, hey, I can either pay you guys, or we'll just do a swap. You drop one of my episodes in your feed and vice versa. And like, it should, push the same listener base to one another's show if, they want to check it out. I thought that was a really interesting, like marketing, strategy. Have either one of you heard of like paid feed drops, or was that just new to me?
I had heard of the promo swaps, and so I think that's very similar to what you're talking about. So there's one side of it for what you're referring to is you just give someone your audio file that's a similar podcast, and you kind of intro it with, "Hey guys, just wanted to share." It's almost like what Wondery does. Anytime that they have a new show drop, they have a trailer which is typically like a few minutes long, and they drop it in all of the Wondery podcasts. So it drives attention and awareness to the new show. I kind of think that's a little annoying at times, because I think it's cool from like a marketing perspective, because I imagine the amount of people that are listening to that would see it. It helps with discoverability, which is a constant problem in podcasting. So I could see where that would make sense, but I almost like it better as a full episode that you preview. Hey, these are my friends over at such and such podcast. I would love for you to check out their show too, because they talk about a lot of the same things. So you intro it as your friends, and then you drop the audio file that they send you. Or doing the promo swap, where you build in those sponsorship, those ad moments within your own show, and then you use those moments to promo swap for other people's shows. I think that is a no-brainer for a lot of podcasters in order to help with that discoverability. So very similar to what you're referring to, but maybe as a smaller ad unit within your own show, or just previewing it and letting your audience know, hey, I think you guys will find this show interesting, and here is the audio file, and just play the audio file as if it were their show, link to it in the show notes, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of value for like networks to kind of do that, because it makes sense if they're all affiliated at that high level. But I'm gonna go ahead and shift gears here, and I want to hear from the both of you, and maybe Alex, you can kick us off. I want to hear maybe what's some of your best pieces of actionable advice for aspiring or new podcasters? Like, what can the folks that are here on the live chat or that'll be watching this video later, assuming that, they're, day-to-day podcasters, weekly podcasters putting out shows, what are some actionable pieces of advice that they could benefit from hearing?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts here, so I'm gonna keep it as brief as I can. The most important thing I'd say, and I anytime anyone's ever heard me speak, I've said this. I said it from stage at Podcast Movement as well. Start with why. And I don't mean like go read Simon Sinek's book. I actually mean start with why. And that to me means sit down and remember why you're doing it. The best way to do that is get rid of this, right? Your phone, and grab pen and paper and write it down with this, right? And write down why you're doing what you do. Immediately connected to that, and directly connected to that, I should say, is your avatar. So think about the why you're doing your podcast in the first place, and then think about who it serves and tie those two things together and get really specific with it. So when I say that, like, build out an avatar, build out an ideal listener is what that means. So I don't mean like a little blue person, right? Like, I actually mean build out some sort of fictitious character that you say, this is who I'm serving. And I put that person right here. So on my computer, they're just right here. My person's name is Adam. I can tell you how old Adam is, where Adam's at in their podcasting journey. My podcast happens to be about podcasting, which is great for this group, but beyond this is weird, right? But Adam is a podcaster who also has a full-time job. And he's somebody who eventually wants to become a full-time creator, right? I have all these details. I can tell you about his family and stuff. And I do that directly connected to the why that I'm supporting to reinforce it and to remember it. And then I ask myself, with everything I do, would this actually support and add value to Adam? If yes, proceed. If no, backtrack, go a different way, right? And I find that this is really helpful to do because of the high failure rate in podcasting. Right now, to make it to the 1 year mark of your show, I can't think of the stat off the top of my head, but here's a better one. To make it to 8 episodes, you only have a 47% chance of making it right now. I know that data because I literally just looked at it before this. So you only have 47% chance of making it to even 8 episodes.
Wow.
When things get tough, when you feel demotivated, what keeps you going is remembering that person, that avatar that you're serving, because it's directly connected to the reason you got into this in the first place. When you can tie those things together really well, it can keep you moving forward. Now, I know that's kind of high level. There are some tactical things as well, but hopefully someone else will get into that. But those are my thoughts on staying with it as a podcaster.
Well said. And you know what, Alex, I'm going to piggyback off what you just set up, because that was one of my items I have here for action advice. Because it seemed like a common theme that I was kind of absorbing is the idea of die-hard fans, like your die-hard community. It felt like the best piece of advice that I got was, instead of focusing on large download numbers, it's like really honing in on who your audience is, like you said, who is your listener? Like, how old are they? What do they like? Like, trying to hone in on like that core audience and those diehards, like serving like maybe a smaller group versus trying to capture every fish in the sea, like honing in on that diehard group that'll be advocates for you. And on the last day, I had walked by this speaker. He was like really energetic and yelling. So I was like, man, this guy's really hype. But he said something I really liked. He kept repeating it. He said, your brand, because he was talking about branding your podcast and thinking from that perspective. He said, your brand isn't something, in terms of podcasting, your podcast brand isn't, your brand isn't something that people should identify. It should be people like, I completely slaughtered it. I'm going to come back to it when I actually get that. It was really good. I don't want to mess it up. But it was essentially like, people shouldn't just be able to identify your show. They should resonate with it. That should be your goal. Having a show where you've got diehards that aren't just like, oh yeah, I've heard of, Badr in the Short Box. It should be, oh man, I love the show. Let me tell you about it. Let me, like, you should check this episode out. Like, you want what was it again? Evangelicus?
No, evangelist.
Evangelist. There you go.
2 different types of fans.
Yeah. That's the level of fans that you want, is like, and I think it goes back to what you were saying, Alex. If you can identify who is your ideal listener and you cater your show, then yeah, like, you're gonna, that'll be helpful to market your show, right? Like, you're kind of feeding, it's just kind of like the snake that feeds its own tail. And I got one more piece of actionable advice, and then I'll toss it to you, Blythe. But especially for like starting out podcasters, I forgot which track or presentation we were at, but one of the speakers said that he has new podcasters write down on a sheet of paper, like you said, the name of their first 10 episodes, And there's something about being able to list out the names of the first 10 episodes and what they might be about, even if you don't have hard details, but like just seeing the names of what your episodes or topics will be about, it helps you a long way to either to one, keep you committed, two, help you out with the planning, and three, I think it feeds back into that, like, once you understand what you're talking about, then you can figure out, all right, well, who am I going to be talking about this with? So I like that idea a lot for like new podcasters. I mean, and even for myself, right? Like 400 episodes in, you know, I'm at this point now where I probably plan out 1 to 2 episodes in advance. But I was going to start practicing, like figuring out, look, let me see if I can content plan for 10 episodes and really fine tune it. Blythe, what about you? You got any actionable advice for our
Hey, Blythe, do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, Badr, you said one thing that I think is really important. Identifying those fans is so important, but I think a lot of people are like, okay, how do I do that? If you're using Buzzsprout, I can't speak beyond Buzzsprout. Again, I'm a customer of theirs, but you can look at your downloads within the first 7 days, and that will help you determine who your fans are. And the reason I say that is if you're a weekly podcaster. If not, this would be different. But if you're a weekly podcaster, the people that come back every week to listen, those are your fans, not the person who drops in every month or every quarter, right? And so I think that Tom, who I think is with us here, somewhere in the audience, has done a really good job identifying that as a key metric to see who's actually a fan of your podcast. And if you're seeing that you have like a substantial number there, you can call them out on an episode, basically like, hey, if you're one of these people I see that's listening every week, send me a DM here or send me an email here, right? And obviously not all of them want to talk to you as much as we'd love that, but a percentage will. And that's how you can really start engaging those fans. So Badr, I love that you brought that up because I think that is that's a key point I'm now going to reference moving forward. So thank you for that. And Blythe, sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No worries at all, because I'm actually going to piggyback off of both of y'all, because there was a couple of different quotes that I wanted to read out. And one of them actually comes from Pablo, who we mentioned a ton in this episode already. But he said in his speech that podcasting is the new golf. And so building those relationships on that sort of like one-by-one basis has such a long-term growth effect for you, because, well, and we said this in our speech, Badr, that podcasting is not just conversations, it's creating relationships at scale. And so thinking of, whether or not that, you have 5 people that are coming back each week, those 5 people really love your show, and they're probably going to tell all of their friends about it if they listen to podcasts as well. So it's that being okay with slow growth, because slow growth is still growth. And so I think that was one really important takeaway. I loved the line, podcasting is the new golf. A couple of other actionable takeaways is the unexpected connections between episodes, and how can we create those connections for our audience. So going back and looking at what your top shows in those first week are, and seeing if you can go back into your show notes and add a link to those episodes. If they're relevant to that specific episode, these are small things that you could be doing in your own show notes to create that additional listenership that, hey, I really liked this episode. I wonder if they have more. Make it easy for them. Put that link in your show notes. Even if the show is already published, go back in, edit it, and add those relevant shows in your show notes so you can keep that person engaged and you can keep them listening. So that was a couple of them. And YouTube. YouTube was such a big discussion. Video was such a big discussion at Podcast Movement as well. We sat in on the YouTube talk. I'm blanking on the person's name, but it was somebody that actually worked at Google, so he had firsthand knowledge of what they're doing with podcasting. You can add your RSS feed to YouTube. You can't pull it in directly yet as far as like an auto publishing type feature. But if you add your RSS feed and you add a podcast playlist, then what happens is after you upload your show to YouTube, so say you take the audio version, you create a thumbnail in Canva, super easy, something everybody could do, and then you upload that video to your YouTube channel, you have to tell YouTube, by adding it to the podcast playlist, you have to tell them that that's your podcast file. They can't tell the difference between an audio only show and a video first show. So you have to help them by telling them the difference. So when you upload your show to YouTube, just make sure that you're doing that little extra step of adding it to the podcast playlist. And that should be in your upload options anytime you go to upload the show, provided that you've actually went through the process of adding your show as a podcast to YouTube. It's a lot of steps, but If you do those first couple things and then continue to add your show to that podcast playlist, that will help YouTube understand that, hey, this is a podcast, they're uploading it regularly. And if somebody is listening to your show on YouTube, then they'll be automatically recommended other shows within that playlist as well.
Well said.
I was shocked how easy it was, by the way. I created like a playlist for my podcast. I thought it was gonna be like a lot more involved, and I did it. And I'm like, it was less than 5 minutes. I was like, okay, so what's the next step? And I'm like, oh, now it just says wait 24 hours or whatever.
Right.
And sure enough, it was there. So I was like, oh, okay. So literally the steps that you're talking about, Blythe, are like, that's all you have to do. So yeah, I have a podcast on YouTube right now. So
yeah, well said. And to go back to Blythe's point about video being such a heavy topic, it felt like every other presentation or a panel was about video. And I think I could easily sum it up to just do video if you can. Like there is no harm, and if you have the capabilities to record your podcast with video, do so, because you don't have, if you don't want to use the video, you don't have to. If you don't want to go into learning video editing and things like that, you don't have to. And you can still rip the audio, right? If you want to be one of those podcasts that's strictly audio only, you've got that option. But why not record video and have, start out small, just cut social clips. Maybe you don't want to edit an hour show. We'll just focus on editing 30 seconds of that video and finding the best parts and use that for social. And eventually maybe level up to where you're dropping a whole episode. I know for me personally, I'll use the recorded, I know for us, we'll just throw this file up on YouTube, but for me, I do the same thing on my show, but I advertise as, hey, here's the uncut version. If you want, the time stamps and, everything else, check out the audio version. So I felt like, video was definitely a big talking point at the conference, but it all kind of landed at, if you can do video, do it, but, you could still grow your podcast as audio only. I got a few just like quick strike pieces of advice. And one of them kind of goes back to our focusing on like your core listeners, and you can do so, or you can get a better idea of what that number might look like. I know, unfortunately, you can't really hone in on like a name and who that person is unless, they're sending emails and whatnot. But there was one of these panels brought up the topic of completion rate, and instead of focusing on downloads, yeah, you might have 1,000, 2,000 downloads, but how many of those are seeing the episode all the way through? If you drop an hour and, a majority of your listeners are dropping off at that 10-minute mark, I think that is an indication of content quality. So yeah, you might be getting 2,000 downloads, but everyone's dropping off at 10 minutes. What does that download number really mean to the quality and growing your show in a meaningful way? So I know with the Apple dashboard, you can actually view your completion rate. I think that information might go a long way in actually helping you devise strategies and make changes to your show to improve it. I think shifting your focus from just download numbers to, can I get someone to complete a whole show? Like, what can I do to like make it lean or even better? And focusing on that completion rate, I thought was a cool shift in the usual talk about downloads.
And real quick, just to piggyback off of that one, because there was another talk that mentioned you should be opening up each show with what the listener is going to learn from this episode, so that you can help your completion rates. You can help those listeners as soon as they click on the episode. It was because from a listener standpoint, you're looking at the title, you're maybe looking at the description, but you're clicking on that title, you're hitting play, and you want to know that that episode is going to match up with what the title says. And so if they're falling off after 30 seconds or even a minute, or if it's taking you a while to get to the meat of the show, try an intro that specifically is sort of like a high level overview of what that listener is going to learn from the episode, and then get into the meat of the actual show. So that was one thing that I learned from another talk that may help with that completion rate.
Well said. Yeah, I've got a note here. Go ahead, Alex.
That I don't know if it was my talk you're referencing or if somebody else did it, but that was one of the main points that we covered in our talk. If I can, would y'all be okay with me doing a screen share real quick? I'll just show you how to get this real quick on Apple and Spotify. Presents, screen share. Give me a second here. I like reading what I'm thinking out loud. Sorry, everybody.
No worries. We're all learning on the go here with this platform.
Right.
Alex, while you're doing that, I'm gonna piggyback off what Blythe mentioned, because Blythe, I think your piece of advice about stating what the folks are gonna hear in your episode was during the art of storytelling panel, and yeah, it was like at the beginning, here's what you're going to get, here's what you'll learn in this episode, and then doubling down, here's what you got out of it. So in recap, here's what we're leaving with. So that way you're kind of once again spotlighting the value, the lesson learned, your whole goal of that episode, once at the beginning and reinforcing it at the end. So there's no doubt in the listener's mind, like, oh, this is what, like, kind of building that subconscious value. Alex, I tossed it to you. Looks like we got the screen share going.
Cool. So this is just where you can get this data of seeing who's actually completing your episode. Hosting provider dashboard. So Buzzsprout for me, I go to see which of the which my top player app is. For me, it happens to be Apple. So I wouldn't log into Spotify, log into Apple, because you're going to be about the same data, right? You can navigate to the analytics page on both of them, and you're either going to look for average consumption or completion rate. They both call it something different. I can't remember which is which right now. This is the percentage that will tell you how far along people are making it in your podcast episode. Super. I think it's, to me, this along with who's listening the first 7 days, those are the two most important things to actually be looking at.
Well said.
And then with stuff like that helps as a podcaster what is resonating with your audience. So do more of it. Find 1,000 ways to say the same thing is what they, a lot of marketers will say. So if you're looking at that data and your listeners are telling you with their attention and with their ears of what they like and what they don't like, listen to them and do more of what they like.
And a little tidbit from a little tip and trick from my point of view when it comes to trying to identify, because like I said, you can't really identify who is that diehard listener unless they're engaging with your show, whether it be leaving comments or leaving voice messages, whatever it may be. What I like to do is leave towards the end of my show, towards the second half. That's when I'll do the giveaways. If we do any giveaways, or if I'm like asking for a call and response, I'll leave that towards the end so I can so that way who is listening, like who is submitting that information based on that prompt. And, that's who you want to kind of focus on, whether that be shouting them out by name on the show or, making a post, whatever it may be. I think that kind of ties in here to the whole completion rate, having people stay until the end and helping you identify like that core community. I got two more little quick strike, actionable pieces of advice. This one was kind of like a light bulb moment for me, but like we were in that sales track conference, and the presenter, who I can't recall his name at the moment, but
hold on, Donald C. Kelly,
who's also
I love Donald. He's a friend. He's awesome. I like Donald a lot.
Yeah, he was great.
Oh, he was stupendous. I won't lie. Blythe had kind of dragged me to that one. I was like, what are we doing here in a salesman? But man, the dude was like, his presentation was exactly what I wanted. Like someone that was going to get into the nitty gritty. And he was showing us like emails, like the physical emails he was sending to potential guests, and showing you like the success and failure of people, like, kind of like, just not responding or brushing them off. But he showed his tactics of like, I reached out to this guy. He didn't want to do a show at the moment, but that initial like email, like getting his email and a response, that tactic of like being whitelisted by his email. Now he's kind of like, he could circle back later. But the big takeaway I got was that after that initial, that first email of saying, hey, I'm a big fan of your work. I think in this case it was like an author. I'm a big fan of your work. I would love to have you on the podcast. He gets a response, either yes or no. But regardless, he follows up with a video. Like he records a quick little 30-second, 60-second video that he puts into the email to let them know that, hey, I'm not a robot. I'm a real guy. Like I'm talking, you know what I'm saying? You get a little bit of your character and your person. It's a personal touch to asking someone for an interview that maybe might be outside of your range, or they're just busy. I thought that was a really interesting way to engage someone and show them your personality ahead of time, rather, because we're so used to getting so many emails, and how easy is it to just close out an email or ignore it. But I think having a video and letting someone get to see your personality in a digital way, I thought that was a really cool tactic that I might use myself.
And I will say too, he mentioned something else about so Badr, you're more talking about trying to get like the good guess. On the flip side, he also mentioned, Donald T. Kelly mentioned, that if someone reaches out and says that they like your show, ask them why or for their favorite episode, and then give them a shout out on the new episode and send it to them. That creates those evangelists that we kind of, hinted at earlier. So that was two really good points that came from Donald during that talk.
Yeah, well said. And last but not least, I've got here is I sat in on a talk. It was titled "How to Edit a Show Together Using Formats and Segues to Make Your Podcast Better," and it was run by what I would consider like a master level kind of editor. He's editing multiple shows. He knows his software inside and out. But he made a point to say that ads are disruptions, regardless if they're host-read ad or dynamic action. They're disruptions to the main show because it's not the main show. It's not what listeners are going there for. But that's not to say that you can't make an ad interesting or worthy of sitting through and, avoiding having your listeners, either stop the show all the way through or skipping it. The two main takeaways I got from this was, one, an ad doesn't always have to be for another company, another service, whatever it may be. You could be using an ad strategically for yourself if you have a network, if you have another podcast, if you have a product. You can make an ad for yourself to promote yourself. And in my case, I have a Patreon. So, and our main podcast feed is free. So why not create a little 30, 45-second ad promoting our Patreon, which fits into the main theme, right? Like it's still the same show. We're just asking you to come, support the show or get extra bonus stuff. So that was a cool, I thought that was good reinforcement of like how to use an ad to your benefit to promote what you got going on. And then for all of our, editors out there, folks that are editing your own show, he had showed an example of an ad that he put into a show, and the setup was awesome. It wasn't just a, insertion, and it was, a host read, hey, get 3 months of Buzzsprout for free, blah, blah, blah. They set it up. This ad set it up. It had a nice little music bed, and the host had asked a trivia question. He was like, hey, everyone, really quick, here's our trivia question for the month of August. What's the largest attended college in the U.S.? We'll be right back with that answer right after this. And then it was a quick little ad read, and then right at the end of it, all right, and we're back. And that trivia question was et cetera, et cetera. So it gives your listeners an incentive to stay throughout the whole ad because they're not really sure how long that ad read was. You know what I'm saying? It's like a fun way of creating an ad and making, your listeners kind of stick through it. I thought it was a really good piece of advice for anyone that edits their own show or is trying to, include ads and, spruce that up from a production standpoint. All right, let's go ahead and turn the corner here. And I want to hear specifically, what questions or new topics did you leave with wanting to explore more? Was there anything that you were introduced to at the conference that was new to you or an introduction to you in some capacity that you're like, okay, I'm going to explore that more. I don't have enough information. Let me go and do my own research. Are there any topics that come to mind, Alex?
Let me think here. I could look. If you're okay with me looking, I write everything down because it doesn't always sit up here. Some people claim they have a steel trap. I am not one of those people.
My Apple Notes was on fire the entire week. So I
Right?
just basically copied my Apple Notes into a doc, and that's what I'm going off of.
Cool. I did not have that in front of me. I'm like, oh, I know. No, I don't. I have to look it up. Let's see here.
Here, I can while Alex, you're looking that up, I'll go ahead and take this one. I would say what questions I had. So there were this is a bigger conference for bigger podcasts. And so for a lot of companies that were there, they were focused on programmatic ads. And for me, I'm a smaller show, and I'm okay with being a smaller show because I know I have a niche audience that I can monetize in a different way versus programmatic ads. So there's traditional ads that you can read yourself and edit them into your show. And then there's programmatic ads that do it automatically. Buzzsprout has a feature that is very similar to just, picking the ads that best fit your show and adding them in. So that's a version of like programmatic ads. And so a big question that I had is, where does it make sense for an independent, sort of smaller podcaster to start using these programmatic ads, because sometimes I think it could also be a deterrent that you're doing all of this work and then you think, great, I'm going to be able to add advertisements to my show now and make money off of this. But realistically, your listenership is too low to take advantage of what, a top 100 show is going to be able to. That's really going to benefit the top 100 show having these programmatic ads. But for a smaller podcast, I was trying to think of when it was going to make sense for them to join. And I just don't think the tech is there yet from the big main stage. I also don't think the advertisers are some of the smaller, maybe local establishments that would make more sense. So I would almost like challenge some of the smaller independent creators to think outside the box and find advertisers that are advertising on shows that are similar to yours, and then seeing if you can develop a relationship with them, connect with them on social media, try to maybe, if they're already spending money on other shows, chances are, they're willing to spend money on, more shows as well. And so keeping that in mind of having almost like a hit list of who you want to target that would make sense for your audience, your content, and that particular advertiser. That's where the game kind of changed for me, is thinking of who is my audience and then the kind of content I create and sort of that Venn diagram of what sponsors would make sense to reach that same audience in the content style that I have. So what companies kind of fit that mold, I think is questions that I was leaving with, because a lot of these bigger shows, they're having those problems solved automatically through these different AI and programmatic integrations. But I think smaller shows would benefit more from developing relationships, not only with their guests and with their audience, but with potential sponsors down the line. They may not advertise with you right away, but if you have that audience that they're trying to reach, there's a higher likelihood that they will advertise with you and sponsor you in the future. So you could have an opportunity to make a few $100 a month off of a sponsorship, and then you get a few of those sponsorships and you're looking pretty good. And so I think having that mindset versus the small amount of revenue you're going to make with programmatic, which is, it's kind of cents on the dollar or small dollar amounts. Think about it from the lens of who can I create a relationship with guest wise, listenership wise, and also sponsor wise, I think was one of the bigger takeaways, especially from that Donald C. Kelly talk, because he was giving real examples of not just from the guest perspective of getting those good guests, but also from a sponsorship perspective of developing the relationships in the same exact way. He says, I think his quote, and I'm paraphrasing it a little bit. He says, you don't wing it when it comes to your shows. So don't wing it when it comes to your sales and sponsorship for that show as well. You want to make sure that you're planning these things and thinking about it in advance of what makes the most sense for you and your audience and your show.
Yeah. I believe he said, don't practice your pitch with your clients, in the moment. I think, building those relationships first, and, practicing, that behind the scenes. Don't approach a client and that's your practice pitch. I think what he was getting at. And to Blythe's point, I felt that my gray area that I felt that I came with, okay, I really kind of need to learn this a little more, was I felt there was a lot of vendors there that dabbled in ad insertion, what you call programmatic ads, even that it was like the state of podcast advertisement. A lot of the phrases they were using, the charts they were showing, went way over my head. And so I left this conference thinking that, okay, I need to get a little stronger and a little more knowledgeable on how ads are being done at this corporate level. What are these phrases exactly mean? How are they done? I think Blythe, at one point, I think after the second day, we were like, I've never heard of some of these companies, but they clearly dabble in AI and ads. That seems to be like a big draw for that conference in particular. Alex, I'll take it to you, man. Were there any gray areas? Did you leave any questions or topics that you want to research more?
Yeah, there was something that so I do dive into this in PodScore. For anyone who's here, podscore.io. It's just a personality quiz for podcasters. I shouldn't say just. It does a lot more than that. But that's where it kind of starts you off. But I do dive into this on that specifically. But one of the speakers said something that really stuck out to me. He said, if no one's sharing your show, is it a good show? I was like, I was like, interesting. And there might be some like outliers where it wouldn't be a show that you necessarily want to share, like if it's something about trauma or anything like that, right? Thanks for that. Appreciate whoever, I don't know which of you shared that, but thank you. Anyway, so I was like, man, that's an interesting point. And I was realizing, like, I started thinking about the way that we share shows. And so I wanted, like, I think this would be really valuable for everybody. If you use Spotify, you share a Spotify link. If you use Apple, you share an Apple link. The problem with that is if you're sending that to somebody who doesn't have either of those apps or one of the other ones, they don't have anywhere to go. Like I tested with a friend. If I click an Apple podcast link on an Android device, it literally goes nowhere. And you can't see any information. On an older device, you don't even actually know what was sent. It's just blank. So it's like, man, that's not an efficient way to share. And there were some companies that were saying, use this and you can just share our link because people should be listening on our playing app, right? And I started thinking, like, from what the speaker said to all those other things, are we actually focusing on shareability? Like, is there an easy way to share it in a way that the masses can actually find it accessible? And so for me, like, that's something I know I want to dive into even more, because I want anyone who gets the link, then I'd be like, oh, sorry, I can't click that link. And then they're just gone, right? I want anyone who clicks it be like, yep, this is what I'm looking for. I started using Podkite to do that. Paying customer, once again, not affiliated, but Podkite, I think it's .com. And they give you like a pod link where it can automatically, one, it remembers if somebody's clicked one of those links before what their player app of choice is, but also it gives you all the options. So it's like you're sending it to somebody, and it's not just going strictly to Apple or strictly to Spotify or Amazon or any of those things. It's going anywhere. And I think that we need to make our shows more shareable. And something I actually did after that as well, on my blog posts, I added a QR code, because people are going to find the blog on a computer, but they're probably not going to listen to the podcast on a computer. So I had a QR code that you can literally scan with your phone. It'll pull up my Kite link, where you can then pick your player of choice and find it really quick. Because I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to listen to a podcast when I work out. So I'm like reading it off the screen. I'm like, okay, this, and like looking it up. If they had a QR code, I'd be like, scan, done, I'm out, right? So that was something I took away that I thought was that I want to dive into even more, because I think there's really something there. Can we get our content shared more and make it easy?
I have a quick plug for the JPU directory in that regard, because if you have your podcast listed in the JPU directory, it plays on any mobile device. So you have a custom link directly to your episode, and you can hit play on a desktop, which my audience, logistics audience, so they sit at a desktop all day. So surprisingly, web browser is my number 2 podcast listening source. So it's Apple, and then it's the web browser, and then Spotify, and then Google Android devices. But if you share your link from your show on that particular episode, somebody can hit play on a mobile browser and kind of, put their phone in their pocket, do a quick workout, and they'll be able to listen to it in the background. So that's another little just a perk of being part of the JPU free directory. So
I dropped the links.
there.
I dropped the links in the chat. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Beautiful, shameless.
There we go. Thank you.
Alex, man, you mentioning Podkite, I think that was kind of my overall big kind of takeaway was personally speaking, my lack of knowledge of these different tools. And I think it comes from being, a 10-year plus podcaster who has built a process, and I'm kind of a curmudgeon when it comes to changing it, or incorporating anything new. And I say, like, we were at this conference, like, who are these people? Not as a gloating, but more of a indication of like my lack of like knowledge. And the fact that being there exposed me to, okay, these are the players in this space. These are folks making software built for this. So I'll say this to anyone that is an old crusty podcaster, that the industry and the tools available, like, you mentioned I've never heard of Podkite, but that sounds awesome. And it's, something that I could probably leverage. So what I would probably say is, if you're an old crusty podcaster, do your homework, see what's out there, especially when it comes to software that might make your process and workflow a lot easier.
Man, guys, first off, old crusty podcaster is great. That really caught me off guard. I laughed and I wasn't muted. I wasn't expecting that. I want to say this. I'm not an early adopter, nor do I really tell anyone they should be. I think that is for, like, if you have a tech podcast, then yes, you need to be an early adopter. For me, just basic rule of thumb, I have a list of things that I would like to see improved in my podcasting process. And if I can find a software that does that, I will be a quote unquote early adopter for it, because I'm looking for that. If I'm not looking for it, I don't want to try it. And a basic rule of thumb with social media, I I always say this with social media. People always get mad at me for saying this, but I won't try any new form of social media for 2 years. If it's still around in 2 years, I'll use it because chances are it's not going to be there. I don't know if Threads will be here in 2 years, but it's already lost like the mass majority of its
80%.
80%. Okay.
Wow.
And the first week it came out, I had people emailing me telling me it's a shame I'm not on there and they thought I was a better creator than that. I just didn't want to waste my time. And so like, yeah, if you're an old crusty podcaster where everything's working and you have no list of things that you want to improve, maybe don't. But hey, if you're not using a tool like, let's just say like using modern hosting, like if you're still on something like SoundCloud instead of Buzzsprout, like trust me, your life is going to be changed and made better. But don't just be the guy who's going to go try every tool. And I know that's not what you were saying there, but I just think it's important to say, don't just go test all of them because you're going to waste all of your time.
And it's very overwhelming.
Yeah,
it's very overwhelming to try all of these, especially with AI. Over the last 8 months, I have really been overwhelmed with trying out all of these new tools, figuring out where they fit in my process. And I maybe have 1 or 2 tools that I've added to the mix. And that's it. I've tried dozens of these AI tools, and it was just more stress on myself. And it was very overwhelming at times to be able to figure out how this is going to work, figure out your processes first, and then figure out where software plays a role. So great point, Alex.
Yeah, Alex, that was a good caveat. You're right. It's, have a reason for trying out some new software. Because to Blythe's point, time consuming. And it could be expensive too. A lot of these will give you, like a free week trial, and next thing you know, you're paying like for the annual. You're like, whoa, buddy, whoa. But Alex, you mentioning the social media thing that you said reminds me of maybe one of the best takeaways I got from one of your Pod Pros virtual events, and I think you had said it where I think you were saying something effective like, I don't like using TikTok, so I'm not on it, so I don't burn my time trying to learn a new platform. I'm sticking to what I know best. And, if something catches my eye, and I like your rule of like, if it's here in 2 years, I'll give it a shot. But I think as a podcaster, you're thinking of like ways to get in front of your show, and you think of social media. And I think you can easily fall into that trap of like, I've got to, be on every single platform. I've got to share my show across everywhere. And you will get burnt out really quick. You either get burnt out or you'll get, discouraged really quick because, it might not hit on this platform and you're trying to figure out why is it doing really well on Instagram, but terrible on TikTok, and I think having a plan of like, I'm going to focus. Matter of fact, it brings me to one of the notes I've got here, which is, I forgot who said this, but someone advised at the conference, a 3-month test and try a new platform or format or content type for 3 months and see the results, test out posting your video podcast natively directly to Facebook or YouTube and see how that does. Give it 3 months, a fair shot, and then move forward so you can at least say, I tried it. Here's what worked. I can move on to, I could shift that over to something else that might work. So good stuff. Okay. We are at an hour, and I think we're getting close to wrap up time. So I'm going to give everyone, the both of you, an opportunity to share any parting words, major takeaways, lessons learned that we haven't covered already. Any last remarks concerning podcast movement, anything you learned or you want the listeners to take away. Blythe, you want to take that?
Real quick, I just wanted to share. I guess this kind of counts as like a takeaway. But all of the Jacksonville podcasters that made it out to Denver, I thought that we're actually missing 2 Jacksonville people that were also at the conference that were not in this photo. So you have about a dozen podcasters from Jackson, from Duval, that made it all the way out to Denver. And I anecdotally, I didn't really, get a pulse of the crowd. But there were, I want to say that Jacksonville really represented, and we might have had the most podcasters there out of any other city in the entire country. So really kudos to all of the JPU members, the people who are part of the Jacksonville podcasting community. Thank you for showing out. And you can kind of see, I don't know if we'll have time to play Pablo's takeaways and clips, but maybe we can put it at the end of this episode. It's about 4 minutes long. So Badr, you let me know if you want me to play that. But I just thought that was just such a cool thing. It was almost like we had to go to Denver to realize how strong the podcasting community is in Jacksonville. Yeah. And I thought that it was such a beautiful thing. So we were able to get, this group shot with everybody from obviously Buzzsprout, we got the Biz Bros in there. Obviously, we had the Pod Match crew in there. Pablo, myself, Rita with Bibbidi Bobbidi Business podcast, and then Badr, of course, too. So I thought that was a really, really cool thing for all of us to experience.
Dang, you took the words right out my mouth. Yeah,
I need that.
I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
I don't have that picture. I need that one.
I got you, Alex. Yeah, Life's point, we went to Podcast Movement looking for outside, help or whoever it may be to take this to the next level. And then it was just a reminder of like, man, we've got so much talent. So much talent that wasn't even there. But the folks that, are on this picture, it's like, man, everyone's doing great things. We got software represented. We've got, folks that are doing this full time and that are offering services. It was, I can get teary-eyed talking about how proud I was of like Jack's representation there. But I think in the larger scheme of things, it really comes down, like my big takeaway was just building on the community that I already have, here in town, whether it be the Jack's podcasters or my listeners, like those diehard listeners that are on, that are on Patreon. Like, how can I really continue to give them value, make them the show, like give them value so that way the show grows word of mouth through their relationships and, them being, the loudest, supporters. So I think at the end of the day, like community, just whether it be your own backyarders, your friends, I think we're just enough that, Jacksonville has got some pretty badass podcast representation.
Be proud.
Oh yeah. What about you, Alex? Any parting words? Any last remarks?
Yeah, it's just going to reinforce what both of you are saying, though. I'll use a quote: "With unity comes victory." Here's the thing about these big conferences: no one who leaves there stops their podcast the next day. Like it just doesn't happen. If they don't go, that could happen at any point, but they're probably going to stick with it. Now they feel like they're part of something. They're unified with other podcasters, and I think that happened great in Denver, but it happens even better in Jacksonville. So my encouragement is, if you're checking this out and you've not been to one of the JPU meetups, or you need to get involved more to just keep that motivation going, remember, with unity comes victory. Get there, be there, meet us. The three of us are there to hang out and chat with you. I personally love to have a conversation with you. That's what I would suggest, and that was kind of like the big overarching thing, if you will.
Well said. Beautiful. And I'll go ahead and we've already did one shameless plug, might as well do one other one. We're kind of burying the lead an hour. You know what I'm saying? This is like, we'll see who shows up or hears this part of it. What is our completion rate? We'll know from this. We are bringing back the in-person meetups. We've got one planned for September 21st. That is a Thursday. We'll do it in the evening. We've got a really badass venue set up. If you've ever been to 1937, is it 37, 32?
Yes, 1937.
1937 in San Marco. It is a beautiful restaurant/bar. They're hooking us up big time. You won't want to miss it. So if you're a local, or even if you're not a local, that was, I think, the other thing I got away from it was not just Jacksonville being like a epicenter of a podcast talent, but really it was like Florida in general. Donald, I think he's in West Palm. I got to meet Stephen Robles from Riverside FM. He's in Tampa. You know what I'm saying? It's like Florida. I don't know, man. We just love talking. We love talking here in Florida. So if you're someone watching and you're here in Jax or just in the Florida area and you don't mind driving to Jacksonville for this meetup, it'll be a good time. I'm excited to bring back the in-person meetups. I know a lot of you in the JPU group are also appreciative.
Stop DMing us. It's happening.
I love it though, because you guys kept us honest and we're bringing it back. All right, fantastic. Alex, man, thank you so much for hopping on for this little virtual hurricane party. Alex, you got any shameless plugs you want to toss? Come on, we're wrapping up towards the end. Shameless
you already put it in there. PodScore is really what I'm very focused on right now. I see that being a big help in the industry, and it's not only mine. Sure, I might be the person who initially created it, but there's technically 39 partners in it. So it belongs to 39 different groups of companies and people that are in this just to serve podcasters. I think that people get a lot out of that. That's my only plug. There's nothing there that you will pay for. Let's put it that way. Unless, of course, you're going to sign up with a service. Can't help you with that, really. I think there are discounts included, actually. But yeah, all in all, it's just I think it'll really help podcasters. This is my big thing. This is like, I think, the thing that I'll be able to be part of that will leave a legacy in podcasting. So it's what I'm most excited about.
Love it. Love to hear that. Awesome. Blythe, any shameless plugs, last words?
Shameless plug, visit the JPU website. We have added new features to the site, including a new partners and vendors page. So if you offer services similar to Alex, if you offer services within the podcasting sector, we want to show you off. So be sure that you submit your information. There's a contact form right on the site. We can get you added for free. There's also a directory. We kind of spoke about it earlier. There's lots of benefits to the directory. All of those downloads that come from the website count to your feed, count to your podcast. So make sure that you are signed up under the directory. It just takes 5 minutes of work, and then you can reap the benefits of that. We have a lot more planned as far as additional shows. We have the new YouTube channel, of course, as well. We're not able to actually live stream on YouTube yet. We have 24-hour waiting period, but that's because we are so new. So we will be putting this show up on YouTube if you want to rewatch it and share it with your friends. But otherwise, just make sure that you're on the JPU email newsletter so you can stay up to date, because we've been collecting your emails. We just haven't done a very good job of communicating with you guys outside of social media. So all of that will be changing, because we are very, very energized, especially after seeing all of the podcasters from Jacksonville over in Denver. So we want to continue to facilitate that community that we've been building over the last 5 years.
JPU 2.0 starting right now is what we're saying. All right. I've got no shameless plugs. JPU, might as well subscribe to the YouTube channel, because this is where all of our virtual events are going to be hosted. Besides that, hopefully you listeners at home got something valuable, maybe an actual piece of advice out of this conversation. If so, I want to hear, what are you implementing? All right. What new tactic, strategy, etc., that you're going to implement based on what we shared. And hopefully we'll catch you at the next JPU in-person event, September 21st, Thursday. I'm going to have an Eventbrite page here up by the end of this week. But besides that, I hope all of you, especially you folks here in Florida, safe, dry, and all of that. All right. Virtual hurricane party comes to an end. Thank you guys so much. Peace.
Hey, this is Blythe here with the JPU, and I just wanted to drop in and say that don't go anywhere just yet. We have that video that we talked about during the broadcast of Pablo Gonzalez. We mentioned him several times during the show. He is the co-founder and podcast co-host of Category Thinkers and also Be the Stage. We met up with him a lot during Podcast Movement and chatted with him a ton. He's also from Jacksonville and one of the leaders in podcasting. So we wanted to make sure to include this video that he recorded for us with his takeaways from Podcast Movement. So we will play this now.
What's up, JPU? Jack's Podcasters Unite. My name is Pablo Gonzalez, and I was there in Denver, hanging out with Badr and Blythe and Alex Sanfilippo and the Biz Bros and Rita and a bunch of other people, Buzzsprout folks. And, that's my first observation is we were really, really well represented there. There is definitely, I think it was like 6 or 7 speakers from Jacksonville that spoke at this conference. So, I think what JPU represents is a really, really valuable nucleus of an ecosystem inside a growing industry that is really exciting to be a part of. And furthermore, when I go to conferences, I don't really go to a lot of like presentations or content. I'm there for the people, right? So I do what's called like the hallway conference thing. I'm always networking because I think that when you do that, you find out about what were the good presentations, and then you can go either connect with that person or see it on YouTube later. It's just more efficient use of my time, and you don't get the opportunity to connect with people. But what I saw reminded me of my early career in the construction industry. I got into the green building space really early. And when I first started going to those conferences, it was a lot of like Birkenstocks and alpaca sweaters. And 5 years later, it was a bunch of suits, right? It got corporatized. There, people found the revenue and the value proposition of what was happening there. And that reminds me a lot of what I just saw in Denver right now, right? Like the first Podcast Movement I went to was August 2019. And from then till now, that first one that I went to felt like a lot of hobbyists. It felt like people that are really, really passionate, and it was a really cool vibe. I didn't meet a lot of people in there that were making money off of it or, had businesses built around this thing. This time around, I did, right? Whether it was all the different software providers, that has blown up. The amount of software providers that are now tailoring to the podcaster and the podcast industry based on these growing trends, the big brands that were exhibiting there, like Disney and iHeartRadio and Spotify and Apple and Google and all these different people, their presence has very much expanded from then till now. And the amount of business owners that were there looking for a use case for podcasts within their business greatly increased. I got into like 0 of those conversations in 2019. I got into a ton of those conversations this time around. And what that tells me is that there's like a real hope for those of us that are already in this space. I had this conversation with Badr around this idea that, he is an OG in podcasting and it's about comic books. And I think that, that's going to do well for him because he's been there for a long time. But even now in his job at where he works, there's an opportunity to launch a podcast, right? The content, to create story out of it, strategize around it, and then the technical aspects, the microphone, the audio, the video, hardware and software stuff is all becoming much more valuable. So whether your podcast right now is the thing that's going to grow a massive audience and lead to, you becoming a full-time creator or not, your skill set as a creator is going to be much more in demand by these companies, specifically in the podcast space, that are going to need creators to validate this stuff. The software brands that are doing this stuff, they all need content creators, and the job of a content creator is going to be expanded. So you may not be able to make a living talking about the thing that you want to talk about, but doing the thing that you like doing as a podcaster, I believe is here. And it's going to continue to grow. So keep getting your reps, keep trying to grow your audience and get those insights and get the things that, understand what you're good at in this space. Because I think there's going to be very employable opportunities that may lead to a career that you're going to enjoy much more. That's my take.